Okay, guys, I am really excited about this episode. It's an all-star panel of people who one, have enjoyed talking to very much in other contexts, and two, have been grounding for me specifically with respect to talking about the ongoing writer strike that has now been joined by actors in Hollywood. You know him, you love him. He's returning to the podcast for the umpteenth time. Josh Olson, who not only is himself a writer in the film industry, but my favorite podcaster. Josh, I miss our West Wing thing days.
It was torture, but I do miss it. It's kind of like the way some people miss having been in prison. It's like I want to go out and commit another crime and start over again.
I talk about the West Wing thing like it's like a stimming. I bring it up in these random conversations. I'm like, yeah, politics and podcasts and what I like and the understanding of the world and liberals are like this. And it comes up so often as I'm trying to have normal social interactions with people that it's become a little bit of a problem for me. So I have to find my new fix. But in addition to Josh Olson, if you watched Rising this week, then you'll have met Blake Masters. Not that Blake Masters. We're talking about Blake Masters, who's a writer, screenwriter, and television
you couldn't
runner.
Get that guy. You couldn't get that guy. You would have settled for him.
Well, I'm not a proto-fascist robot, and I actually have a human soul, so there's a little difference. We did both graduate from Stanford with degrees in econ, but I actually decided to be a human being.
Well, we're thankful for it. So, Blake, all right, start us off. For people who, for some reason, might have been living under a rock and not following what's been going on in Hollywood over the last now more than 70 days, where are we with this writer strike? How do we get here?
Oh, I think got here. Oh, good.
Well, I think we're in full Macbeth land where, we're so deep in the swamp, it's just as painful to go forward as go back. But we're a long way from the end. Mostly because I said on the pod on the Rising this morning, we've reached a place where what's become very obvious is that the writers and actors are on one side, and that the companies on the other side are actually fought in very different businesses at this point. They have very different goals. The companies are vertical monopolies negotiating as a cartel who view content as a necessity for their utility, which is they view content like you would the electricity going through the power grid, because it's all monetized by a big swampy subscription fee. And you've got artists and actors and writers and truthfully all the other crafts who, to maximize their pay, need to make as good art as possible. And the good is the enemy of the adequate. And that's why, despite the fact that we make them lots and lots of money, they don't want to pay us for the value we create, because to them, that's not the value. To them, the value is the utility, not the electricity.
So, Blake, I want to get into specifically how the new technology, how streaming services have caused there to be a mismatch between kind of this value add and how much the content creators, the actors, and the writers are being compensated. If I could take it just a step back for a second, Josh, my understanding is that this is the first time that both actors and writers have been on strike in tandem since the 1980s.
Well, no, actually, 1960.
The 1960s, since Reagan. I'm sorry, you're right. Since Reagan was the head of the guild.
I have a very complicated family. Essentially, my stepsister's mother, who I'm very close with, is a great actress. Her name is Lois Smith. She's the oldest one ever to be nominated or to win a Tony. And her first movie was East of Eden. And we were swapping texts the other day. She's 93. And we were both having a laugh over the fact that it's her second strike too. Just mine was 2007 and hers was 1960. And yeah, Ronald Reagan was the president of SAG, and they got themselves and us. We got residuals out of that, right, Blake? Blake's the
we got residuals
that's a huge deal. That's
before that, there were no residuals. What was at the beginning of the TV era? So you had to set the blueprint that everyone's been following ever since, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot more to that. To get residuals on future programming, all of the actors in 1960 had to actually give up residuals on anything made before 1960. This was the deal cut by Lew Wasserman, for which he rewarded Ronald Reagan with his own television show producing deal, GE deal, and eventually the governorship and presidency. And so the launching of Ronald Reagan's career was actually the selling out of the Actors Union, behind the scenes deal between him and Lew Wasserman that made him into the icon of the right. So essentially Hollywood labor got a great victory, but they also gave up residuals on anything pre-1960 in return for which creating Reagan. Yay.
So you're telling me that you guys gave us Reagan and you guys gave us Donald Trump? Like,
Yeah, because we gave you reality TV when we went on strike, and there you go. Yes, we are responsible for everything that's bad in the world, plus really good movies.
What you also have to understand, though, is what Josh is pointing out is for all of the cries of liberal Hollywood, the people who hold the checkbooks in Hollywood have always been conservative. They were hardcore anti-union in the 40s. They were hardcore anti-union in the 80s. They are that way today. They are capitalists in the absolute meaning of the word. And in the modern late stage capitalism, the point is suppress labor, all the value, all the money goes to capital. It goes to a smaller and smaller winner take all version of capitalism. And it's not just entertainment. It's the same in the NBA. It's the same in any corporation. It's the same as, in the NFL and the salary cap. The quarterback gets 50 million, the lineman gets 200,000. It's more and more spreading. And so this is a systemic issue with our economy across all sectors. We're just a very visible sector where the people who create the value are run down and all the money goes to the people who handle the accounting. And I could get deep and really angry into the way that this generation of executives aren't creators. They aren't moguls. They don't build anything. What they do is they move commas around on balance sheets to make themselves look good to Wall Street. They don't actually even save money. The write-downs that Zaslav took on Batgirl aren't tax deductible. He didn't save Warner Brothers a dime. All he did was change where the commas were on his balance sheet, on his asset and liability statements, so that ratio would look better, so he could borrow more money at a cheaper cost. It was literally a balance sheet adjustment. It was not even a cost savings to eliminate Batgirl, pull things off all these streaming services. It is all of the art and energy that people who could make more money doing something else put into these things was thrown out the window, not even to save money, but to move numbers on a balance sheet. These people are accountants.
So, Blake, I've seen some people make these comparisons where I think Ken Klippenstein had a great tweet where on one side was an article, and which let's see if I can find it. And the title, it announced how much money. Oh, the annual, because this was a Hollywood Reporter article that was titled "Annual Cost of SAG-AFTRA, DGA, WGA contracts, maybe $450 million to $600 million a year." So, the cost of what people wanted these negotiations, the workers wanted these negotiations. And then someone had put side by side that over the last 5 years, all the top studio heads had been paid an equivalent amount of money. Obviously raising the question, well, the money is obviously there. Wouldn't it be better spent making thousands of actors and writers compensated fairly for their work versus being paid out to these CEOs who you're saying, Blake, don't even add value here, don't even save money or do anything even outside of a creative context to add value to the enterprise. How did we get here?
Oh, well, two factors. One is we went from people like Ted Turner, whether you like him or hate him, he was the mouth of the South, all those things. There was something that existed that didn't exist before when he was done. To people now who are buying companies by borrowing money and moving stuff around on balance sheets. The reason, though, they get paid so much is, and my dad actually had a business where he was a consultant to boards of directors. And there's an absolute dysfunction in the modern board structure. Not just that labor has no voice on the boards of directors as it does in Germany and other countries where labor is guaranteed a seat on the board of directors. The amount directors are paid has gone through the roof. It has multiplied 15, 20-fold since 1980. And what that means is it's now, instead of being an honor and a somewhat sort of noblesse oblige honor to be on a board of directors, it's now incredibly lucrative. And since if you're on the board, you want to stay on the board for little work, cashing a large check. Who keeps you there? The CEO. The CEO wants the board to approve the pay package. So you approve the pay package, he approves your pay package, so you make more money, he makes more money, you stay on the board. It is an incestuous cycle between boards of directors and their CEOs, all of which is based on mollifying the stock price. And the stock price is based on asset liability ratio, which is really, if you can't increase revenue, you have to lower expenses, which means you have to suppress wages. But really, it starts with that very cozy relationship between the boards and the CEOs. What should be making sure the company is being stewarded by somebody. Instead has been, let me install my buddy, pay him as much as we can possibly pay him. In return, he'll pay us as much as we can pay us. It's no wonder they grab all the goodies.
All right. So, and I recently saw, what was it? Some reporting, I think it came in last night, wherein people had a chart explaining what some of the demands had been side by side with what
the response from
the response was. Yeah, Josh, walk us through the kinds of things people are asking for and how receptive the film industry has been in response.
Well, this was these are the SAG demands, and SAG had extended. What was it? 12 days, Blake?
No, it was a week. It was from right before 4th of July to the 12th.
Yeah, so they had given the AMPTP an extension on this in the hopes that they'd be getting better, but by all accounts, things were pretty dire before then and didn't change much. But I mean, it's a lot of stuff from simple things. One of the things there was like slightly better penalties when you make people work massive overtime hours, which was just outright rejected. And those numbers haven't changed in decades. To the one that everybody got knocked out by, and it's kind of I think it's a sort of apt metaphor for the whole thing, was the thing with background players and who are extras essentially, or I think day players as well. People come in, maybe have a line where you would come on a show and they would scan you. Essentially, you would work for a day, you get paid X. Believe me, no one's living off that one day pay. Mm-hmm. And then they have you forever, and they can drop you wherever they want you, that company. So they literally came to the table with the notion that people were going to accept whereas once you could make a living doing this and come in and work for 6 days and get paid for 6 days, we're now just going to pay you once for one day and then never again.
And when you say scan them, you mean like to use an AI?
Yeah, it kind of uses, essentially virtually. So it can drop you in the background. It's easy to do. I mean, that we're already there, like easily. Nobody's sitting around looking at, somebody sitting in the back of a scene behind Matt Damon at a restaurant going, that doesn't quite look like the extra I saw in that other movie last week. Mm-hmm. So it's there, and that stuff's scary. They're clearly fixated on that at all levels of our business. Obviously it hits us too, the writers and directors in other ways, but that was a big deal. That's taking a lot of focus, which I'm fine with. I don't know, Blake, because it's an issue that, as much as it's almost science fiction, everybody kind of understands. And everybody's sort of seeing affect their own lives. Like if you're in 2007, we had support from the public. It wasn't as vigorous. And if I would go into my local grocery store, I might have to explain to the clerk where I've been shopping for 10 years what our issues are. But now I don't have to, because he's looking over my shoulder and he's seeing the self-serve machine right there. He knows exactly what the issues are.
Well, there's 2 points on that I think are worth following. What they're really doing is essentially taking all of someone's future earnings, meaning their value as a background player, and making it so that for one day's wage, in perpetuity, they can wipe out the rest of their career. Meaning they can take their image and put it in the background of any shot they want to forever for one day's wage, which for a background player, not a speaking player, but a background extra, is $60. And for that, they want your whole life. What also you have to think about is it isn't just those background players. There is a cascade effect. There is a huge web of people relying on this. Let's say you have a scene in a restaurant where you have a small number of extras, 20 extras. For that 20 extras, you're going to have at least one extra hairdresser, an extra trailer, 2 extra PAs, all of these things. So there's a web of probably 20 to 50 other jobs that exist every day because you have those background players. You don't have those jobs anymore. So essentially there are 2 less PAs, 1 less makeup person. I saw a breakdown on this. Is essentially if you would take out 20 extras, you would eliminate 72 work days for other IATSE players on your average episode of television if you eliminated those 20 extras. So this is something also people understand. And it's one of the reasons we have support within the community, but it's also something people ultimately understand is that this has a cascade effect down the line. This is, again, it all comes back to the number of winners in the society is getting smaller and smaller. And this is why there's an absolute flaw in laissez-faire capitalism that absolutely must be ameliorated, even if you're not as far left as Josh.
Well, this raises some interesting questions because there are people who will say, okay, it's not that the technology is bad. It's just that we live in a world where people's entitlements, quotation marks, to having food and shelter and healthcare and life-saving services is connected, we've decided in our society, to their ability to work. So if you're going to eliminate entire sectors, whether it's trucking or fast food service, because there have been improvements in technology, it's not that the problem is getting rid of the job. The problem is that you haven't provided for people to have those basic quality of life services in the absence of those jobs? And do we need to move to a society where there's a universal basic income, a more Star Trek-like society where we're not, compensated for our value or for our labor, but because of our intrinsic value as human beings, and we're just off exploring the stars and things like that? So do you think that there is a creative loss issue with respect to the influence of AI here? Or is it more about the kind of, financial hit that people are taking when the sector just disappears entirely? Or is it both?
They're both. It's very much both. I mean, one of the things, it's interesting, when, and you guys touched on, I think, on your segment on Rising, but, I spend time now talking to people who are in the AI group and the Writers Guild. And one of the things that's great about our union, there's a lot of things that are great about our union, but one of it is that we have got, Blake, cover your ears, a lot of nerds. We have got people whose job, they do their job because they love diving deep into stuff and learning everything there is about it. We have people who can explain AI to the people who invented AI. And the other unions don't have that. They've got their own specialties, but we've got those people. And I've talked to a bunch of them too, to make sure I'm not, because there's a lot of craziness about AI. Somebody ran recently an interview. There've actually been a couple of these where somebody interviews AI and they're like, what do you intend for us? And it's like, there's no consciousness there. It's going to tell you whatever you want it to tell you. You might as well be interrogating a shoe for all the, do shoes want to destroy the world and take our jobs? It's like, no, it's just smart text like on your phone.
Yeah.
But when it comes to writers, what they want to do is they want to go, I write a certain kind of thing. And it's like, we want to do a movie about a crime boss on the run, and we want to do it in the style of a Josh Olson script. What they would like to do is punch all that stuff, take every script I've written, punch it into AI. And AI is not at the point where it can do this yet. That's the other thing people don't get, which is good. And then it'll spit out a script that'll be okay. And then what they'll do, because rather than hire me at my rate, which is X, to come in and write that script, they'll hire me at what's called my polish rate, which is a small percentage of X, to basically to barely even rewrite it, just clean it up, move a few paragraphs around and make it sound a little nicer, so it's not completely awful. And then just get to that bare level of competence. And then that's all they want. There's no impetus to make anything great. It's funny, people keep talking about how, like, well, it's bad for the mediocre writers, but like Martin Scorsese will be fine. Like, I think Martin Scorsese is more fucked than anybody else, because they don't care about that anymore. They don't care about movies that take big shots, that try to do something transcendent. They just want entertainment that is just good enough that we'll all just sit there on our sofas munching on popcorn going, oh, that's okay, I guess.
So walk me through that, because my co-host this morning pushed back against that a little bit. I think that there's some mixed ideas here, because it does seem like there's been a rise of this thing called prestige TV in the last, I don't know however many years since The Sopranos, where 20, let's say, okay, the last 20 years, where there are shows that people really love, that are on the prestige platforms like HBO, let's say, and
Max, forgive me, Max. Yeah.
Which, by the way, is a tell. The fact that they pulled HBO off the branding tells you everything you need to know about what they want the platform to be.
Well, what does it tell me? You're saying that they're acknowledging a quality diminishment?
What they're acknowledging is that the HBO imprimatur, which was this sort of scene of highbrow quality, does not actually matter in their model. Going back to what I said about them being utilities, this is where what I mean is that there's a difference in the end goal here, which is, if your goal is, as Josh said, to have content that just makes people sit on the couch and eats and goes, this is good enough, I'll deal with it. Now, any artist who sits down starts writing because they want to say something, to communicate something, even a bad artist. And maybe they do it well, maybe they do it grandly. AI has no intention to communicate anything. What the studios are gambling on is that the public doesn't care, and that there's a giant bet going on right now. The studio's bet is, if we make it just good enough and just familiar enough, people won't cancel. What the writers are betting on is that the history of Hollywood is the studios get to a point where they think they've solved the problem forever. We've de-risked. We know how to not make movies that lose money. We know how to ensure that we can do it. If you go back, the studio system was a version of this. Action movies are a version of this. Rom-coms are a version of this. The Jeffrey Katzenberg 1980s doubles theory. There's a whole memo you can go back and look up for those deep divers. They've been doing this forever. This Marvel movies were the ultimate example. It's like, we can make Marvel movies and guarantee these opening weekends. If we just invest this amount of money, we'll get this amount of profit. We will turn movies into Cheerios, which is really the product they all want to fucking make. Sorry, can I swear? I apologize.
No, you can swear.
They all want to make Cheerios, because Cheerios is the perfect product, because you can make the same product the same way forever and make the same margin forever. It's totally predictable, and you never have to change it. Problem is, they believe they can do this to content, and the audience will never go away. Here's the thing.
Are they unfortunately right about that?
That's the bet. And I think when you look at the number of movies that are about Marvel fatigue, when you see all these articles about like, oh, these movies aren't doing as well as the box office, indie didn't turn out this or that, what you're starting to see is the beginnings of fatigue, of IP fatigue. Of, God, it's another Ant-Man. Oh, it's another indie movie. Yeah, it's Tom Cruise jumping off into the cliff, doing the same stunt that was better in Spy Who Loved Me with skis. It's the same stunt, by the way, and it was way cooler on skis. Nerd. But we're tired. We're tired of these formulas. Yeah. And so the bet is they think the audience they think they can sustain the audience forever. And artists are betting that we will need to do something new at some point. That at some point the audience will just go, I'd rather play checkers or play video games, and that they're going to see erosion in their numbers, because this happens every 15 years in Hollywood. You know, anybody who says, oh, we're in prestige TV. Prestige TV was 1998 to 2007. It was, it basically,
the West Wing.
Breaking Bad was the last prestige thing, because Game of Thrones was something new. Game of Thrones was IP based. Game of Thrones is a different version of things. Game of Thrones was trying to take Lord of the Rings, the movies, which made $1 billion, and move it to TV. And once they realized they could make it for 8 years, they wanted to make it for TV again. And did you notice nobody cared when Amazon made it? They spent $1 billion on Lord of the Rings and did okay.
Yeah, I mean, the Lord of the Rings one I was not a fan of, but I have been enjoying, I did like Game of Thrones. I have been enjoying House of Dragons. I mean, and there is, even in the context of streaming, it seemed at the beginning that streaming was allowing new kinds of shows to come out as well, because there were some positive consequences of having a different kind of platform where you're dumping all the episodes at once and you're creating a different kind of fandom. Robbie and I were reflecting on how much we both used to love Orange is the New Black, and how I believe that prompted me to buy my first subscription. And we were talking about how that, like, there were these things called Netflix shows that genuinely did drive your choice to subscribe, because you felt like you were left out of the zeitgeist if you weren't watching it. Stranger Things is another one of those big hits that happened in the context of Netflix. And I wonder what you guys think. Are those the kind of shows that you would expect to have seen in a normal cable context? And is that a good thing or a bad thing in your view?
Are you familiar with Hollywood between the years 1967 and 1975?
I mean, I wasn't there.
That's The Graduate to Jaws. It is this golden era referred to. Basically what happened is the studio system had no idea what they were doing. They gave a bunch of cameras to a bunch of film school grads who made the most amazing films of the 20th century in America, and it is known as the golden era. Well, guess what happened? As network TV started to die and cable and streaming rose up, they gave a bunch of TV shows to a bunch of people who made a bunch of amazing things, centering people like in Orange and New Black who wouldn't normally be at the center of drama, stories you wouldn't have heard, more diverse stories, different formulas, different scales, big stories, small stories. The Bear,
The Bear, yeah.
And where we are now is not 1975, it's 1983. We've passed the peak. The corporations have started to seize control, and we're about to go into that sort of mid-80s programmer era of all of this, where, you'll still make the equivalent of an Oscar series, your one high-end thing, your lost leader. You'll spend more money on that. It's the shiny thing that gets you to subscribe to the whole month. We give you one good thing and then 12 versions of something you could have found on Freeform, much better version 10 years ago. They are trying to essentially, the freedom is over. There's this sense that freedom is continued. Freedom is over. That died the same way that it did in movies in 1975 when Jaws showed up.
My little brother works for Netflix, and we've been having this ongoing conversation about the decisions they've been making to cut certain kinds of content, not because it seems to be performing less well than other kinds of content, but because they're streamlining and making these kind of decisions. So like going into the last political cycle, they cut all of their political shows, including Hassan Minaj's show, which I always really liked and thought he was very charming and good. And they kept a bunch of stuff, and you couldn't make rhyme or reason of it. And then they made a bunch of content that seems very formulaic, kind of scripted drama it's not clear who it's for. You see franchises
it's for the algorithm. It's for the algorithm.
You know what? It's me. I'm the dumbass. Like, I'm the person who Netflix tells me to watch the thing, and I click on it because there's nothing I hate more than scrolling. I'm a maximizer. If I've got an hour, I'm not going to spend half an hour scrolling. I'm going to spend 2 minutes scrolling, which means that I'm the person who's going to watch whatever the other top 10 movies in America are. I'm going to watch that horrible not Chris Pratt, not Chris Pine, the one that's Captain America, Chris
Evans.
Yeah, love him. He's great. He wasn't good in that movie with the woman from Spain who was Marilyn Monroe.
Gray Man. Yeah, the Gray Man.
No, that's not Gray Man. That's
it's Gray
something. Gosling. It's some other thing. They're on a date, right? Don't they go on a date and he finds out she's something or other? And
yes. What is it? Chris Evans. Anna de Armas, Ghosted. Sorry, it was called Ghosted.
Ghosted, yes.
Gray Man was also not good. But like these kinds of movies, but I will watch them because I don't know. I'm like that person.
They're solid enough. They're solid enough. What you're not going to do, they're going to be state of the art here and there in terms of like stunts or what have you. And you're going to go, that was cool. And 5 years from now, you're not going to be, because it doesn't matter. You're not going to be going, God damn, you remember that scene in Ghosted where, I don't know idea. I've never even seen it, where you're like, but you still remember Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore in that Clay, it's like
100%. And in fact, I have gone back. My friends and I, we all joke that all we do is sit around watching movies from the 80s, which apparently is not a good period of time. You're telling me, Blake.
70. You should go to 70s.
We were just rewatching Network. We went through all the Nancy Meyer movies again. I mean, and it feels different and it feels good, but knowing that we're part of the problem, I mean, how do you get out of it? How do you get out of this situation?
Hang on a minute. I think there's an unstated piece to all of this that I think is important to recognize, which is people consume movies and television for different reasons at different moments in their life. I refer to it as,
or even in the day.
Yes.
There are moments
to numb the pain,
sit down,
to forget your worries, as an alcohol substitute.
There are moments I want to sit down and I'm willing to. I have to be in the right mood to sit down and watch The Wire or Deadwood. But it is a very specific, forward-leaning, engaged, emotionally, intellectually, full-on, locked-in thing. Mm-hmm. And then there's television I fold my laundry to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there is sort of all versions in between. And I think that a lot of the stuff that the algorithm represents, and that I think that the platforms think they can create through all their de-risking strategies, is fold your laundry television, which is kind of numbing. It's comforting. My wife's version of this is HGTV. Mm-hmm. For some people it's Virgin River. It's or for my father-in-law it's Walker Texas Ranger and Blue Blood. It is
the summer I turned pretty.
Yeah, it's the
teen dramas.
Exactly, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's because one of the great things is it's just as hard to make that television as it is to make The Wire. It requires different level of intellectual ambition, maybe. But physically, the amount of time and effort to make a good version of a network show is incredibly hard. So we need to differentiate the idea of that all television is one thing for one purpose. It's like saying all automobiles are for the same thing. No, there are minivans and there are pickup trucks and there are 18-wheelers and there are sports cars. They are bought by different people, used by different things, and sometimes you use more than one in a day. That's content. And so we need to sort of get away from one size fit all. Not all content is made the same. I think what the companies are gambling on is they don't have to produce all kinds of content, and the ones that they want to produce, that for them de-risk them financially, because this is all about finances for them, don't actually require an artist behind them trying to say something, that it just has to be familiar enough, tropey enough. The problem is, if you told AI or if you told an algorithm to create a Nancy Meyers movie, it would lack one specific thing. the reason Nancy Meyers makes the movie. Nancy Meyers can make a lot of movies, but Nancy Meyers chose to tell that story at that moment in her life with those artists, usually because of things that had nothing to do with anything else that the algorithm could ever predict. I mean, one of my favorite stories about this, the classic thing that in every AI discussion you get is everybody says, well, AI could write Law and Order. You just plug all 500 scripts in and it'll just spit it out. I created Law and Order LA. I was the co-creator with Dick Wolf. So I worked with Dick extensively on that. And I quizzed Dick on the origins of Law and Order. Okay, so let's even say AI could do it. But AI could never create Law and Order, because here's why Law and Order was created. Dick Wolf had just finished being the head writer on Miami Vice, where he and Michael Mann warred with each other every day to the point they had offices at opposite ends of the same building, would get on the phone, scream at each other, and every office between them could hear the whole conversation. They hated each other. So Dick wanted a show that was not at all cinematic. It was pure talk, and he wanted it to be something he could syndicate. And Magnum PI had just syndicated and underperformed in the syndication market because it was an hour. Nobody wanted hours. Everybody wanted half hours. They wanted Roseanne or Home Improvement, all those kinds of shows. So he says, how do I make an hour that I can break into 2 half hours to syndicate? Law, cops for half an hour, lawyers for half an hour, where there's almost no crossover. I can break it in half and syndicate it as 2 half hours. He never did. He never had to. But that's why it's structured the way it is.
Huh.
It had nothing to do with...
Oh, that's fascinating.
No algorithm could have come up with that set of consequences. Now, like it or hate it, I think it's a beautiful Swiss watch piece of television. It's folding laundry television for me. For other people, it's the passion in their lives. And it's
I'm an SVU devotee. My eyes are glued.
Yeah. But the mothership was created by something that no AI could ever do.
Yeah.
And that's the point that we can do this with the algorithm. It's my problem with the Marvel People Council, where they think they can dictate on high and just sort of tell you what you're going to do 7 movies out, because there's no invention, there's no emotion, there's no personal stake from the artist put into the art, because it's the artist wanting to communicate something, even if they don't know what they want to communicate, that actually makes art that engages you. And it's, whether you like Nancy Meyers movies or think they're, not for you, she was trying to say something that meant something to her and her friends and the actors she worked with, and spoke to an audience they recognized as true. It's also the other piece. It's something they didn't know, but felt they'd always known. It's like people say about Bob Dylan songs. Those words should have always been there. That's what great art does. Is it reveals to you something that you always knew, but nobody had ever put it that way before, and AI cannot do that. An algorithm cannot do that.
I want to go back to something you said about, because people always go to Law and Order when they talk about how easy it will be for AI to replicate shows for obvious reasons, just the way it's perceived. I'm not knocking the show. And, I've spoken to, like I said, the AI people in the AI group at WGA, and they're like, one of the things people don't understand, and I'm not downplaying the threat, but in terms of where we are, there's, I think, 700 episodes of Law and Order shows now. You would have to feed something like 100 times that many episodes into the AI brain before it could start kicking out something that could vaguely approximate a Law and Order.
Is that really true,
script.
Josh? Because
apparently, yeah. Because
I was just listening to The Daily. So at some episode either today or yesterday, they had an episode. They had a segment on AI, and they had this writer on, a journalist, who was talking about how unnerved she was by how close the AI got when she asked it to write an article on a subject that she often writes about in her voice. And to the point that it was using turns of phrase that she didn't realize she regularly used. But when she went back and looked at what the AI had generated, she realized, oh, she does say this relatively frequently. And it gave her chills. And I presume, that this writer, has written less than the number of Law and Order, episodes that exist out in the world. So, are you really... Is the argument really that the AI isn't going to be able to do it, or is the argument?
No. The argument is that we need to deal with it now. I'm just saying that the people freaking out that we're all doomed and out of a job tomorrow are like, no, but we need to deal with it now before we are, because they're gonna start using it. And one of the things too that people don't get is we want to prevent. And it's going to sound like I'm saying I want to use it, like I don't give a shit, but I have. In fact, this is very funny. I do a movie podcast with Joe Dante, and we did. On the air, somebody said, would you guys ever work together? And I thought it was the first time I used Chat GPT. And I just, as a joke, we had to find something in common. Joe did Gremlins, that's the kind of stuff he does. And
oh, cool.
And I did, I was like, how about Dirty Harry meets Gremlins? And we punted into ChatGPT, and 30 seconds later, it had spewed out an outline for Dirty Harry meets Gremlins. And the amazing thing about it is that, and I'm not saying it's the most original idea in the world, but it's not a movie you've thought of before. Within a sentence, it was already the most cliched thing you had ever seen. It just trades in tired ideas that are already, that are used to the maximum, because that's what it's doing. It's searching out the most common denominator. But I want to go to
that's the problem. That's the studio thinks that's good enough. They think they're not trying to believe in they can create scripts tomorrow. What they do believe is they can create outlines, declare the copyright on that outline, even if it was trained on your own voice, and then pay you less money to write a version of that outline. And that's the danger. Is these companies think the AI can do things that it can't, and that they're.
I mean, it also seems like, I mean, the issue here, we're kind of talking about the creative implications of the streaming services and the desire of studio heads to be cost effective, as opposed to, because there's a relationship between streaming, what makes you cost effective on streaming, and the emphasis on getting the products that are good enough so that people retain their streaming services, as opposed to needing to get products that are good enough to get them in the door at movie theaters, or I guess to subscribe to cable, or to get their eyes on the show in a Nielsen box rating sort of way.
Yes, because how they get monetized.
Right. But then there's this other piece of it, which is that, okay, even if I didn't care about any of the diminishment and creative value of the final product, the problem is that the new ways of doing things don't compensate the people who are working on these products, whether or not it's a good product or not. Right. So, I mean, part of what was kind of galling when I pulled up some of the deal points that SAG released was that some of the asks were things like increasing the penalties for not providing the meal breaks to staff that they're obliged to provide. That was rejected out of hand. Increasing penalties for failing to allow performance efficient rest between workdays. That was rejected out of hand. There's those kinds of issues, like basic labor issues. And then there are these other structural issues that people have been talking about with respect to writer rooms, and how writer rooms are staffed in ways that end up cutting most writers out of the most lucrative parts of the process, cribbing their work and keeping only one or two showrunners on to get the fuller salary that a whole room used to be able to benefit from. Tell me a little bit about that, Blake.
Well, the model used to be under, say, a network show, which would make 22 episodes a year. They would only have 6 weeks till the first show was on the air. So they had to get moving really quickly. So they would pile a large number of bodies, 10, 12 people in a room, and just start churning stories as fast as they could. And they would, for about 10 months, churn as fast as they could and hopefully stay ahead of the train of production and make 22 episodes. Now, because this was the industry standard starting in 1955, the way companies negotiated with writers was your fee will be per episode. And if you write the episode, you get a script fee on top of that. And so what we do is we would then get paid for 10 months and then 2 months hiatus. So basically a year's work for 22 episodes. Now, when cable started to rise and streaming first came around, they started to make short orders. They would only make 10 episodes or 11 episodes, and they would do it in the same 10 months. Well, if you get paid per episode, you just got a 50% pay cut. And then what they started to do is the studios started to realize, well, if we stretch it over 14 months, because the algorithm tells us the same number of people will come back after 14 months as will come back after 12 months, we've now actually slowed down your pace for seasons. You've just taken another pay cut, which about, I have to do my math, it's about 1/6 of a pay cut.
So are we getting less content? Because it doesn't feel like
you're getting less of your favorite content. If you notice that your favorite shows don't come back at the same time every year, they come about 14 months now, unless it's network. And then with the absolute collapse of network television as the dominant force, what it meant is that the way new shows are built didn't have to conform to the way network television had to do it, which was very fast and once a year. all of a sudden they could take forever to develop a show. And what that allows them to do is de-risk, which meaning like before, I've got an idea, I'll pay you to write that idea. Now you got an idea, bring me a script. Okay, you got a script, now bring me an actor and a director and a Bible of all this stuff before $1 goes out the door. Where before you come in, you talk for 20 minutes, they'd agree to pay you for a script. Now you have to deliver the script, the Bible, the actor, the director, you have to deliver the whole package to get a meeting. What they've just done is taken the R&D portion, which they used to pay for, and made you, the writer, pay for it on spec. Now, we get even further, which is because they're now stretching these longer-term runs. It used to be that when you hired writers, you greenlit a show and hired writers. So the writers were guaranteed all episodes produced because the show's being made. What they do now is say, we're not guaranteeing that we're making the show. We're not greenlighting it. So we don't guarantee anybody's producer fee. And so if you're around for production, yes, we'll pay your producer fee. But before, we're going to do a pre-greenlight mini room where we take half the number of writers and we pay them weekly scale. So instead of making, X number of money a week, we're making basically the absolute minimum we can pay you for 10 weeks. In those 10 weeks, the showrunner and that smaller number of writers are expected to essentially break the entire season, write half the scripts, have outlines for everything else, and then after 10 weeks, the network basically says, get out of here. Then they greenlight the show. So they don't have to pay producer fees to those other writers. They pay it to the showrunner. If the showrunner's lucky, one other producer. See how they've just taken a whole big chunk of labor and milked it? So that's one big piece. And if you think about the consequences of this, by the way, for a younger writer who never is around for production, who is only there for these short stints and sometimes doesn't get a script, it's very hard for them to prove their worth. It's also very hard for them to learn their skills. Television's always operated as somewhat as an apprenticeship program. So if you are a minority writer, if you are a less represented writer, they'll give you the first job because they want to claim diversity. But they won't let you get the skills you need to do the next job or to be the person who sells the show who gets kept around. So it puts a glass ceiling on younger writers and especially younger diverse writers. And I do mean, BIPOC, non-cis, all across the board. So even if you are the most, privileged writer, even if you are a rich, white, male, straight writer from Harvard Lampoon, it's hard to get out of that lower level because they put this glass ceiling where you never get the experience to learn your craft. And that's another problem. It's also why part of the strike conditions are about minimum writer rooms, to create a track for those people, privileged or not, to get the experience they need to create that content. Because if you don't train them, you are never going to have those voices create content. So you're actually wiping out future shows that could be from a non-straight white male Harvard Lampoon point of view. You're killing it because the people who would write them never gain the skills to get to the position where they can create the show.
So
they've also in features, there's the version of it in features is they've slowed the process down to where, used to be, I broke into the studio system. My first big job was a movie called History of Violence, which I got, nobody knew who it was. I wasn't a big writer. I show people the pitch document for it and they can't believe it. It was a page and a half of bullet points. The last job I got, it was weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of development and meetings and tweaks and meet with this person, then meet with that person. Then you slowly make your way up a lot. And that was after I was now a known quantity, nominated for Academy Award, all this stuff. So now I'm not an unknown. The workload that they expect you to do before you get the job has just exploded. And there's one of the things in that chart you were looking at of demands and so forth. One of the things was they were asking to pay people sooner. And if you take a look at it, they're like, no, we're just going to keep paying the fines and paying them late. But I will tell you, I started a job. Well, I didn't start a job. I'm on strike, but I was officially commenced on a job shortly before the strike that I'd gotten. I write with a partner sometimes that he and I had gotten the deal close to a year ago and had finally gotten paid to officially start right before the strike began. And what they're doing at every level, I can take that hit. I do all right. And it's like I work and, I'm constantly juggling projects. There are people who are much younger who are, their solution is they're working 2 jobs or what have you. But what they're doing at almost every level, and this is the area where I get some hope, is they have basically, that article came out in Deadline and they're like, we're going to wait them out. They're going to lose their houses. And, there's that great Rod Perlman video. But, there's also the fact that like, hey, motherfuckers, you're inventing the army that's going to crush you because we can wait a very long time now because you've taught us how to do it.
Hmm.
They have forced us to go long periods of time without
Right.
income. So I meet kids on the line who are like, yeah, I got a second job. I do this, I do that. I mean, people are sort of at my level who are like, yeah, I've just been working and being smarter with my money and doing everything I can to, just deal with the fact that now I get paid once every year and a half instead of once every year, whatever it is. We're ready for this. So that gives me some hope, in spite of the sort of insurmountable nature of some of these issues.
Well, that being said, Josh, I mean, how are you feeling this timeline is going to look? I mean, obviously we had the writers on strike for months before the actors joined in. That seems to be a really amazing move of solidarity and escalation, both substantively and in terms of kind of the media interest in the story. When you have the incredible marketing for like the Barbie Oppenheimer extravaganza cut into, because now all of those actors that are no longer promoting those films, it, I think, is drawing a lot of important attention to the struggle that the writers have been engaging in a long time now. So what is this looking like in terms of the anticipated timeline going into the rest of the year? Because there's already been changes to the fall schedule, the lineups and things like that in favor of reality TV. So what's going on?
I mean, Blake and I have two minds, and I'm interested. We'll let him talk. I mean, of course, your listeners should know that the reason I just found this out, the reason SAG went on strike, apparently, I don't know if you know this, was because they wanted to keep Jim Caviezel from being able to keep promoting Sound of Freedom. I just found this out the other day.
Wait, is that real?
That's a theory.
No,
no, that's not like SAG. We shut down $1 billion business so this guy couldn't promote some movie. No, that's the current theory.
That's the conspiracy theory. So if people don't know, Sound of Fury is this movie that stars this apparently conservative actor that some liberals,
friendly actor.
QAnon wacko, yeah.
Right. So the liberals are characterizing it as this QAnon movie, although substantively, apparently the movie is just a straight movie it's just like a regular action film about child trafficking.
About white saviors saving little black children. And
are they Honduran? Are they like in South America?
Something like that,
yeah. It's kind of insulting in a lot of ways to people who go, how is this insulting?
Okay, but it's the idea is that there's this back and forth over a movie that I think substantively is not especially political, much less political than something like Passion of the Christ, which this man also starred in, right? With the problematic Mel Gibson and all of that. But one side says, you were telling me, Josh, that one side, the conservatives have a theory that they
think Hollywood is trying to shut the film down because they're threatened by it. And the hilarious thing is they're pointing to things like the fact that a movie theater will say it's sold out and there's nobody sitting in there. And that's because church groups are buying up huge masses of tickets and then giving them away to people to go see the movie. I mean, it's all just ridiculous shit. I shouldn't have dragged us down this rabbit hole. But I have now heard
going back to the original question.
I've heard from two people that the theory is that SAG went on strike to keep this movie from making any more money. But my answer to your question, and it's different from Blake's, we were just talking about this last night, was my sense has been, and I try to avoid any kind of theorizing over how long this will last, because who the hell knows. But I'm thinking now that we're both in it, that's got to be better. We've got to get to a solution sooner. My friend Blake Masters, although apparently feels otherwise. So
I don't feel otherwise. What I will say is that if you'd asked me this question 2 weeks ago, I would have given you Labor Day. And that the clumsy, ham-handed ways that the studios handled everything leading up to the actor strike, I think has convinced me that for everybody, me back will be Halloween. And it will be the writers last because they will want to punish us the most. So the one saving grace here is that the companies that own legacy networks, so Comcast with NBC, Paramount with CBS, Disney with ABC, can't afford to lose an entire season. They would want to keep everything from hopefully November sweeps on, but absolutely from Christmas on with real programming because the amount of money they will lose is huge. And so there will be a sense of division potentially within the AMPTP between the pure streamers and the people who still own over-the-air network. But I do think that they're going to want to seem strong, so they're not going to engage with the actors for the rest of this month. It will take at least a month for the actors to make a deal. So maybe the actors are back at Labor Day, but they're going to want to punish us for at least an additional month to 6 weeks. And so that's why in the back of my head, it's sort of the math adds up and you're looking at Labor Day. I mean, you're looking at Labor Day at the earliest, Halloween at the latest. And I have to say that my own opinion of this strike and what this strike's about has evolved 3 different times. You know, at first I thought it was about the idea that there were a whole bunch of standard business practices that had never been codified. So the companies had been eating away at the margin. And, okay, so we just got to codify those. And that's what the strike's about. And there's this token AI thing. And then the companies lost their minds that we'd even bring up AI. And all of a sudden, it became a strike about AI. It became a strike about that. And it was that for, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks. And then I started to really stare at it. And that's when I sort of came up with my, that line I used, which is the companies are in a different business than we are. And until we figure out a way to bridge that, until they either realize their picture of what the business is wrong, and I do believe they're wrong, and there is this gamble going on, or we find a way to bridge that, and they're willing to acknowledge the fact that our financial incentives and their financial incentives have to find a meeting place, there can be no agreement. I think fundamentally we are in a moment of basis change within the industry.
I mean, there was an article recently there was an article recently in some I can't remember, it was a trade magazine or maybe it was The Atlantic, on David Zaslav as a profile, and they were taking the position that he's the worst mogul. The brief time he's been there, he's the worst mogul in history, and he's just failed spectacularly. And I'm reading it, I'm like, this is actually kind of dangerous to think it this way, because if you just think about this guy as bad at his job, it changes the dynamic. And I'm like, no, he's actually very good at his job. It's just you don't get what his job is. His job is not to come in and bring HBO back to its halcyon days of The Sopranos. His job is to take all this stuff apart and sell it for parts. And that's what we're dealing with. That's what Blake's talking about. We're here to make movies and TV shows, and and they're here to service Wall Street. And it's never been that extreme. The Batgirl thing was really fascinating to me. That was a moment when they just ditched a movie, because I have no illusions about who used to run these companies 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. Somebody in accounting would have presented them that theory 20 years ago and not been fired for such an insane thing. But they would have gone.
For people who don't know what happened to the Batgirl
it's what we were talking about earlier, where they basically took an entire $100 million film and took it as, what is it, like a tax drawdown rather than release it. They
declared it a total loss, which allowed them to accelerate the depreciation on their balance sheet.
And buried it completely. You will never see it. It was almost finished. For a brief period, they were trying to put out the notion, oh God, it's unreleasable. But then you start talking to people who actually seen it, and people are like, the response I've heard, and not that this matters, but the response I heard was ranged from, yeah, it's okay, to like, hey, it's pretty good. In the old days, someone in accounting would be doing their job to present them with this option. And then what they would have said is, yeah, we can't do that. We need to maintain relationships with those producers. We need to maintain relationships with that director, with those actors. It's like, you can't just go burning bridges to that degree. And they wouldn't have done it. They'd have other ways to screw you, but they would not have done that. But now they're doing it with TV shows that are disappearing off Disney, that are disappearing off a lot of your streamers, where they're gone. They're gone forever. They're not
I was
bringing
reading,
it back.
What was the TV show that they decided just to take it down? And because it was there's no hard copy version of it, it doesn't exist anywhere. And they do it because they can then save money on residuals.
It's not about residuals again. What it is they have booked the value of these shows on paper over 20 years. They take depreciation each year. Imagine if you buy something for your business, you buy a bread making machine for your bakery. You essentially take the value of that, and it's worth less money every year. So your asset, $1 million bakery worth of things, is worth $900,000 year one, it's worth this amount year two. So you have a depreciation loss. You've lost $100,000 because the machine's a year older. And so they have booked these movies and slowly being lost, losing money over 20 years. There's $100 million we spent, and it is now valueless here. Well, we scrape all that losing and put it in this year. And it literally comes off the books as a loss. It is an impairment charge, which means it doesn't count as a loss.
But
we're actually able to take it off early. It's an accounting trick. It's literally an accounting trick.
But what's confusing is that most people would presume that you could make money on the movie if you put it out, that there's some value to the movie for getting eyeballs on it.
But this goes back to the first thing I said. In the old days, when Josh was saying the accountant would come in, I would say, even if they didn't want to maintain the relationship, they'd go, this is a turd. How do we maximize the money the company made? We give it no ad support, but we put it out there. We put out DVDs. Maybe we put a little ad saying, this is the movie they don't want you to see. We run a really cheap campaign, and we get as much revenue in, because the only way we can get revenue is to monetize this particular one piece of content and get eyes on it. Otherwise, we can't do anything with it. Now, when the eyes on any particular one piece of content don't matter, in fact, we're monetizing the whole slate at once. We're not doing it one thing at a time. In other words, that extra $5 we made on Batgirl, that's why we would put it out. Now, we don't make an extra $5 for putting out Batgirl because it's just one less title. There's no change in our income. If we think we can remove this and not lose subscriptions, we will remove it because we get the accounting benefit.
Yeah, that's what I was reading. And that's when the residuals came in, that people said that when you don't think there's that much more upside because you're not earning money on any single product like that, plus there are costs to having it out in the world like residuals, then people look at the cost benefit and say it's just not worth it.
Residuals are about the residuals compared to the accounting trick, compared to the money saved in the accounting trick. The residuals are like this. I mean, you see everybody saying how much residuals they're getting on Orange is the New Black, 57 cents this there. The amount they're paying in residuals is an order of magnitude lower than the amount of the accounting magic they're pulling. Because if they can say on their accounting balance sheet, their assets to liability ratio is better by $100 million, which is all an impairment charge is, because there's no extra money coming in. We've just taken all that loss, put it here, but don't have to declare it as negative revenue. We essentially put it here. Our balance sheet looks better. Our stock price goes up because the Wall Street analysts want to see, how do they price it? What's your price earnings ratio? What's your asset liability ratio? This is all they're doing. They're not actually making any more money or any more product. They're rearranging the numbers so that they look better to somebody, at a terminal, day trading. That's why they're doing it. They're not even doing it for Josh's reason, which is they don't give a shit about the relationships. They're making a bet. They're betting the house that the audience eventually, over the long run, will be desensitized and not care and never go away. And
it has been very inspiring to see, frankly, the whole slate of actors across the spectrum demonstrate so much solidarity. I mean, I always loved Fran Drescher, but this has been a real feather in her often very colorful hats. I wonder. I wonder what are you at all, surprised, heartened by the solidarity? I mean, we've spoken a little bit about what it means for the actors to be joining in this. I've watched any number of content creators that I've enjoyed over the years, people like Francesca Ramsey and Adam Conover talking about the residuals and standing out on the picket lines. And it does seem like a learning experience that might affect people's attitudes toward labor even beyond this particular sector. I mean, how are you feeling about it all in this moment, and how can people be supportive who want to be supportive?
Well, it's pretty extreme, is the thing, and people understand it, and they're seeing it happening in their own lives. I'm talking about within the community, and people outside the community can see it happening in ways that are very clear, that don't require you to have to go, well, here's how the business works, and you'll see that they're blah 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 blah. And as well as I do, I mean, we did the entire run of The West Wing, minus one episode that had no politics. We did Star Trek. And, I've got friends who are good liberals whose position, they enjoy the show, didn't change a bit, who, 20 minutes of this shit, and they are like out there, going, go Ron Perlman, let's burn down their houses. As well as I do, that nothing radicalizes like reality. And that is, the reality right now is that people are seeing it happen in their own life, and they're going, oh shit, this is real. And it's kind of waking them up, I think, to some degree. What's your sense, Blake?
Well, again, I always have numbered points because I was raised by two lawyers. The first is, I think one of the reasons you're seeing such solidarity from movie stars down and from showrunners down is that if we're in here making this sausage, we understand that this is a collective endeavor. There's a reason the WGA and the sort of Prince Darling directors who think they're the center of the universe did not join us. They convinced their geniuses who authored everything. We all know that this is a collective endeavor. My words don't mean anything without an actor to say them. The actors have nothing to say without us to write them. And we know that as television writers, we're made better by the other writers on our staff. Actors know fundamentally the joy they get is being part of a cast, working with a fellow actor. That is the joy. So we are collective people by nature in the television business. So what makes us different from book writers. So internally, the solidarity doesn't surprise me at all. Plus, we also are very performative, and we all think we're oppressed. So it feeds all of our strange neurotic buttons, and we get to go out there and promenade. What I think is the most important piece on this, and why I think the strike is different, is that it is a high-profile version of a type of labor pressure that actually everybody else everywhere understands. What is becoming bare is the nature of the new capitalist economic model with winner take all. That's familiar. The minute we tell that story, everybody goes, "Oh, I get that." That's the same thing as, in sports. It's the same thing as my company. It's the same thing as everybody else. The suppression of labor, the attempt to replace us with technology. These are familiar to an auto worker. These are familiar to, hotel workers. These are familiar to fast food workers. And one of the hopes I have is that if people view us, these sort of closeted, rich writer people, have these problems, we can make it understand what our problems are so that when they talk about UPS drivers, they go, "Oh, right, it's the same problem."
Mm-hmm.
And so that there can be a groundswell of support for unionization, because the only thing we have, because it's not going to be the courts and it's not going to be the government, they're not going to give us the protection against these vertical monopolies then acting as a cartel together. The courts are packed at this point. Justice Department isn't bringing cases because they don't want to bring cases they know they're going to lose till they get friendlier courts. Monopolies are here for the next 10 years. Our only hope is to save ourselves through collective bargaining and unionization. And that message, starting from a very high profile industry, hopefully can set an example, because if we can go out and win, then anybody can go out and win. It's not a bunch of teamsters. It's everybody needs to win.
I just want to add one thing to something Blake said, or just a side note, and then I want to answer part of your other question. It's to the DGA. I mean, it's kind of astonishing, and it goes to sort of our pride in our union and our nerds. Is that I've spoken to very high-ranking people in the DGA, and they, up until they made their deal, they genuinely believe that AI affected us writers more than it affected them. And you talk to the AI team, and they will tell you it's the exact opposite. But in terms of your question of how people can help, another reason I love my union, we hit the ground running. We're ready to go on a dime. We have captains already ready to go if we go on strike. SAG hasn't gone on strike since 1960, so they're getting up and going, and we're helping them, and they're going to be like completely ready to roll. But they're out there doing great. But we do this. We have a big strike fund that we're okay on that front. But there are a couple of organizations, and I can send you links to put in your show notes, but places where people can send money that are helping other people in the industry who aren't in SAG and who aren't in WGA, who are getting hammered by this, because a lot of people are. There's the Union Solidarity Coalition, and then there's also the Entertainment Community Fund. They're both good groups, and people can send them money. And also, if you work in the business and you're getting hit by this, you can also go to them and apply for help as well, because we're okay. We're in for the long haul, and we're ready.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
The last thing I'd say is look at your own life, look around. Do you need to be in a union? Is there a union for your own industry? Walmart. Do you work at Walmart? You need a union. You work at Starbucks? You need a union. It's not about us. It's about all of us creating a social contract that is true to the real American dream and the real America, which is a melting pot where there is enough for all, where we have, a safety net, where we have the ability to rise, and where the amount of money in your wallet doesn't equal virtue, and where your ability to achieve is not hemmed in by how much cash your daddy has.
Amen to that. You guys have been so amazing today. And I got to say to folks who weren't privy to our pre-recording chit chat, I'm unsurprised that the two gentlemen before me who have such amazing politics and such warmth and solid humanitarian instincts also happen to be die-hard Trekkies.
Well, one of us,
So you're shading Blake for not having seen Deep Space Nine?
We'll get him there. We'll get him there.
That has to be a whole other episode, because I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about that, Blake. But thank you so much for joining me. Thanks to everyone who's listening to this episode. If you want an additional episode of Bad Faith Podcast every week, in addition to this free Thursday episode, you can subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. I will put the links that Josh sends me in the show notes. And can you each tell the audience where they can find more of you on the internet and beyond?
Oh, God, Blake.
You can find me at Twitter at bmastersb.
And I'm on Twitter at something or other. I wasn't ready for this. Come on. Oh, at Joshua R. Olson. I'm pretty easy to find. You can also check out my podcast, The Movies That Made Me, where we talk about great movies with filmmakers and artists and comedians, and also The Audit over at The Lever, where we get way more political. And, we just finished a deep dive into PragerU, which was terrifying. I'm still washing the maggots off myself.
LOL. Please do listen to that. I'm really not kidding when I say that Josh is probably my favorite podcaster. That's who I listen to, not just when I want to fold laundry, but when I want to escape life, generally speaking. LOL.
Or
all right.
Angry. Thank you so much, Brie.
Take care of yourselves, and as always, keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you, and as always, keep the faith.